it was made, because the Taiwan company that makes these iPods is in Hangzhou. So basically, you've got an iPod that comes straight out of the assembly line, gets lasered with my name and email address, and goes straight from the manufacturing facility to some kind of storage, whatever, and then immediately the order fulfilled. Now, again, it may not seem like much, that story, but if you think about the power of the commercial power that is in evidence there, because basically China has shown that it is so plugged in to the global supply chain, and it's so efficient, right, that a company, if it organizes things right in the mainland today, can fulfill an individual order of one iPod straight from the manufacturing direct to the consumer. That's complete disintermediation of so many steps that used to exist. So the cost of that is clearly manageable, because it doesn't make the iPod so expensive that I wouldn't buy it. If anything, the iPod is so inexpensive that I want to buy it. So think about that. Right? We're talking about something that's not just a little toy or a bit of bad pet food. We're talking about a product everybody wants, and China is able to supply it so quickly, straight from manufacturing to the end user in that short of time, all through online ordering. Power, I mean, that to me is harnessing the power of globalization in a magnificent way. Something that today could not possibly happen in Africa. It's very unlikely to happen in, say, India, because of the infrastructure problems there. And I would even dare say that Europeans would have problems doing it. I don't know. I mean, I generalize, but I think that but it bears thinking about. Now, I raised two things about the obverse. Okay, the China as this force of globalization, we see it happening. That China is able to do all of these things, powerful things in manufacturing, but clearly they have needs. And that I just mentioned two things: that energy security and food security become very important when you're a fast-growing economy with a lot of people, and you've brought all these people out of poverty, and you need to have a high level of growth, sustain it. And beyond that, in an Al Gore world, you need to have sustainable growth. You can't just, the leadership now understands it can't just have growth at any expense, that it has to think about the environment too. So that's a major overlay and responsibility. So energy security becomes very important for China. China, to fuel its growth, needs the energy from whatever sources it can get. And it needs the food, because it can't just be dependent on the food that itself grows, and that it needs to be able to diversify its sources of food as well as sources of energy to ensure that it can satisfy the needs of its people. So these energy security and food security become very important, and then I'll talk a bit more about that later. So the overriding need then, if China is to continue to succeed and continue to grow, from their point of view, you think about it, it's the high growth you need. And many analysts say, and I don't know why they said this all these years, but we take it almost like gospel truth, that China needs to grow by at least 5% a year in order to create the jobs necessary to absorb the unemployed. Because if you think about the SOEs that are laying off people, you need to create more jobs to absorb those people, as well as the new intake of graduates. And you think about a country of 1.3 billion, and how many people are graduating every year? A lot. So to maintain the high growth and to sustain it, and to maintain social stability, and to also look after the environment, you need to, these become paramount goals and the mission of the Chinese government. So sometimes, we think, people outside of China, we think that a lot of what the Chinese leadership decides to do or wants to do, or the decisions that the Chinese leadership makes, whether it's about the renminbi or about its banking system or whatever, that they're thinking primarily about what the outside world thinks. I would beg to differ, because I think that that tends to be a mentality that we impose upon them. But I think it's important to understand that a lot of the policies that China comes up with, particularly even on its domestic economy, whether it lets the renminbi appreciate or not, or does it clamp down on interest rates, has much more to do with its sensitivity to domestic needs than it does to satisfy the pressures coming from overseas. In many ways, they couldn't care less about what people think in Washington or London or Canberra or whatever. They think much more about what people think in Wuhan and Qingdao and in Shanghai in terms of making sure people are happy, people are continuing to prosper, and that people have jobs and there's sustainability. We have to think about it that way. And increasingly, they think about the environment in China. And that's become very important. So while China is a force of globalization, a lot of things are happening and they're riding that wave, but they're really very intent on managing it well so that it's sustainable and that they don't lose control. And that's where losing control is very important for the Communist Party leadership. Extremely important. They don't want to do that. Now, as I mentioned, I think we should also then put China in the context of this wider trend in the global economy, which is, it's not just about China growing, right? It's about a number of emerging markets coming up and opening up and liberalizing. So we know about the India story, we know about Brazil, but there's also Russia, there are also Turkey, there are also many other economies that are coming up. Eastern Europe is growing. South Africa, I don't know if any of you have been to South Africa, but if you go to South Africa, one of my favorite places to go to, it's truly amazing what's happening there, because South Africa is also similar to China. I mean, China is first world, third world, second world, all sort of wrapped up into one. And in many ways, South Africa is the same way, because South Africa has, part of it is industrialized, and part of it still remains in abject poverty. But it's still, it's an amazing amalgam of those sort of societies or sectors of society are in different stages of development. Southeast Asia, the Gulf countries, all these sort of regions have been on the move and are mobilizing its people. A lot of that growth due to bringing down tariffs and opening up their economies and liberalizing. Now, I just wanted to bring up this particular concept, which is fairly new in business strategy, which is the Crimea concept, because I wanted to, again, illustrate that China shouldn't be taken in isolation. I think it's the folks at A.T. Kearney, a consulting company, that have tried to champion this idea of Crimea. Now, what does it mean? It's China, India, Middle East, Africa, kind of an arc, an emerging market arc, if you will, of growth, high growth economies, stretching from China all the way to Africa. I personally would also include Latin America, so I would call it Crimea, because I think Latin America shouldn't be left out. Now, if you think about the competitive advantages that each of these groups brings to the table, to the globalization table, talk about the low-cost skilled and unskilled labor of China, the manufacturing prowess that it has. You go to India with its IT expertise, its burgeoning services sector, and its low-cost labor. You go to the Middle East with its energy resources and its financial resources from the oil price windfall. And you go to Africa with its natural resources and food, and Latin America similarly with its natural resources, commodities. You go to Brazil, and the Brazil economy is one of the stars of Latin America today. And that's almost, well, it's almost exclusively because of commodities, because prices of commodities have gone up. It has a lot to do with China, but it's not